Well, we've been going through the Sermon on the Mount and had a couple heavy lessons past few weeks, but on um, sexual temptation and adultery and divorce and all these things that are heavier topics. And so this one, thankfully, is not quite so heavy, but it certainly is still regarding Jesus. Jesus' call for his followers to live by a higher standard. And he's going to talk about the topic of oaths. So coming on the heels of the talking about divorce and the importance of making your commitment to your spouse and holding that commitment to be of the highest value as an unbreakable commitment. Jesus continues on in this idea and discusses oaths. So I'm going to read just one verse for you to start things off. Matthew 5:33 says, "Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made.'" So, what is an oath? Well, an oath is a promise or a vow that is invoking on a higher power or authority than oneself. So, this could be everything from a political figure placing their hand on the Bible and taking an oath of office, or you take an oath to tell the truth when you take the stand as a witness in a trial. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. That would be an oath. But another oath, example of a less serious oath, might be considered, where you maybe hear in movies, where I swear on my mother's grave, like I I swear on the Bible, swear by my mother, swear by my father, whatever, swear to God. Those things are oaths that are taken. Now, in general, we don't really take those oaths as seriously as the oaths to an oath of office or something like that. But it is an oath in general is this promise that is invoking a higher power, and the understanding is that because of invoking or calling upon or swearing upon something greater than yourself, there's almost this consequence for breaking your oath. Now, Jesus says in this verse, he says, "You have heard it said." Now, this is something I haven't really brought up in the other lessons, and I want to take a moment to point out. When Jesus says this, he's referring specifically to the teachings of Israel's religious leaders that the people would be familiar with. So, this is different from when he says, "It is written," which indicates that it's going to be a direct quote what he says. So, "You have heard it said" is meaning he's referring to the Jewish leaders' teachings, and "it is written" is a direct quote typically. And so in Matthew 5, every single one of these examples we've been talking about, he says, "You have heard it said." Even though he's talking about Jewish laws, which are found in Scripture, so he is kind of doing this blend of both. Like, yes, he's talking and quoting Scripture, but he's more specifically, if you look at the actual Scriptures, they feel kind of like loose quotes, and that's because they are. He's referring to how those laws have been taught. And so he's doing this, while he's discussing Jewish law, he is more concerned with how those laws are being taught by the scribes and the Pharisees. So he's more concerned with what the people are hearing about the laws and correcting that false teaching, or correcting whatever the teaching is that they're hearing. And so in this verse, the teaching he's quoting is actually referencing 3 different verses. So let me read just those 3 different verses to you. Leviticus 19:12 says, "Do not swear falsely by my name, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord." Numbers 30, verse 2 says, "When a man makes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath to oblige himself by a pledge, he must not break his word, but must do everything he said." Deuteronomy 23:21, "If you make a vow to the Lord your God, do not be slow to pay it. For the Lord your God will certainly demand it of you, and you will be guilty of sin." So these 3 verses, they're indicating that if you make an oath on God's name, you'd better fulfill it. So if you swear by God's name, you had 100% better fulfill that vow, because you don't need to use God's name to falsify your word. as proof for your lies. We need to take God's name seriously, to respect it as the creator of everything. It is not something to just be thrown out lightly. I swear to God, I'll do it, and then you don't do it. What does that communicate about your belief in God, about who God is, about the authority of God? And so this is something in the Bible very clearly. If you swear by God, you had better do the thing. And so don't use his name to falsify. And then if you just make a vow in general, Numbers 32, when the man makes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath to obligate himself by a pledge, you must not break his word, but must do everything he said. So just make sure that your word is good, and don't use God's name to falsify your word. So with this in mind, let's talk about the actual teaching on those laws, because obviously Jesus didn't quote just one of those. He is referencing all three and the teaching regarding those three. So to avoid sinning by falsifying their words with oaths in God's name, the Jewish teachers, rabbis, they're teaching that it was forbidden to swear by God's name at all. So you don't even just swear at all by God's name. So it says, Scripture says, if you swear by God's name, you better fulfill it. The rabbis taught just so that you don't risk not fulfilling it and disrespecting the name of God, just don't ever swear by God's name, which is not technically what the verses say. So, Jewish teaching, it's teaching that an oath, they also would teach that an oath was more powerful or more binding or sacred or whatever. The more powerful this oath was dependent on how sacred the object or person, deity, whatever was on which that oath was sworn. So if I swear on my dog, that's less of an oath than if I swear on my mom, if that makes sense. So depending on what you're swearing on, it is a bigger deal if you break that oath, and that oath is more unbreakable and more powerful or sacred, depending on what you swear it on. So, since they weren't allowed to swear by Yahweh himself, what they would do is Jewish rabbis were great at loopholes, and so they would swear oaths by objects closely connected to God in some way, such as his throne, the temple, or the altar. So I swear by the throne of God, by the temple of God, by the altar of God. These are things that are close in proximity to the Lord and sacredness, high in sacredness, and yet, and yet they are themselves not God, and so they're not risking breaking an oath to God. So on one hand, they're leaving it out, and just in case they do break it, at least it's not God. But on the other hand, they're trying to make it as holy and as powerful of an object to swear on as it can. So, in true Pharisee form as well, they had developed this loophole system where certain objects truly bound you to your promise versus ones that were not sacred enough. So there are certain ones that if you swore by this thing, you had better not break it. This way, you cannot break these oaths. But if you swear by the other thing and you break it, well, that's too bad. Whatever. And so they have this loophole system where they actually, like, certain oaths were considered to be unbreakable and others were not, and they knew what those objects were, and depending on the situation, how seriously they were actually going to swear on something, they'd choose an item that was less important or more important or whatever. And so they wanted to provide themselves with an out. And so this creates a culture of breaking their promises and their untrustworthy oaths. And in fact, the oaths become this thing that makes you look holier rather than just being honest. So you look really holy if you swear on something that's the holiest thing ever. Like, oh my goodness, you are so holy. You would swear by that. You surely must not break your oath. And so it became almost this pride thing. And so this is the context under which Jesus is teaching this section of Matthew chapter 5. And so he said he's preaching against this. And he preaches against it again later in Matthew, and I want to give you this example here. Matthew 23, verses 16 to 22 says, "Woe to you, blind guides! You say, if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing, but if anyone who swears by the gold of the temple is bound by that oath, you blind fools. Which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? You also say, if anyone swears by the altar, it means nothing, but anyone who swears by the gift on the altar is bound by that oath. You blind men, which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? Therefore, anyone who swears by the altar swears by it and everything on it. And anyone who swears by the temple swears by it and the one who dwells in it. And anyone who swears by heaven swears by God's throne and by the one who sits on it." So what he's saying is you can't pick and choose what you swear on based on sacredness. What makes the objects you swear by sacred is God Himself. You're swearing by the temple. What is, if you're swearing by the gold of that's on the altar, well, then the altar is what makes the gold sacred. But what makes the altar sacred? Well, the fact that it's a part of worship towards God. And so, in the same sense, you are still swearing by God, even though you're trying to work this workaround or whatever. And so you can't just pick and choose what makes an object sacred or not. You either swear by everything on it and the God who makes it sacred, or you don't at all. And so this is Jesus's later teaching of Jesus is on this idea, and it gives you some examples of what they were actually doing. So let's come back to Matthew 5, and so let's jump into the next verse. "But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is His footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make it even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one." So he's saying, hey, don't swear by heaven. Again, this is God's throne. Like, everywhere you swear, everything you swear by, you're going to end up swearing by God. Don't make an oath. Just flat out don't do it. Instead, because you're creating this culture of dishonesty and of loopholes that give you a way out, don't even make oaths. Don't even do it. Instead, you should live your life where your word should just be good enough. You should not need an oath to be honest. And so don't even make them. If you go in somewhere and somebody asks you if you're going to do something, if you're going to help them next Saturday, and you say yes, don't need to say, I swear I'll do it. I'll swear I'll be there. Or they don't need to be, you don't need to be the kind of person that are like, are you sure? Like, are you really going to be there? Texting you a couple times throughout the week, just making sure you're still good to be there. When you say you're going to do something, let your reputation be such that you are so honest that if you say it, your yes is yes and your no is no, and there's no in between. And so because of this, he's saying don't take oaths. What oaths are doing is just creating this culture of dishonesty and breaking and pride at how holy you are. Just be an honest person. This is the higher standard he wants to follow. Just be honest. When people talk to Christians, should they just be able to trust their word? If they say they're going to do something, they better be able to do it. So, does this mean that you can't take oaths at all? Like in the instance of political office or stepping on a stand and swearing an oath? No, this does not mean that. Some stricter Christian denominations throughout history have taught that you can't even participate in military service or political office because it would require you to take an oath and swear on a Bible or something. And so because Jesus says don't take an oath, they take it extremely literally, and they say, well, this is then therefore I cannot do anything that would require me to take any kind of oath. But if this was the case, why then did Jesus himself speak under oath? In Matthew 26, 63 to 64, this says Jesus is being questioned right before his death. But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. You have said so, Jesus replied, but I say to you, all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. So Jesus is commanded to swear under oath, and Jesus testifies under oath on his own behalf. And God also swears by himself throughout Scripture. Just one example for you, Genesis 22:16-17. I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this, you have not withheld your son, your only son, I'll surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. And it goes on and on there. But he starts out, he says, I swear by myself. So God is actually in both instances swearing by himself. Jesus is charged to swear by the God Most High, which he is. And then God elsewhere in Scripture swears by himself as well. Now, like I said earlier, the Bible does not say to not swear by God's name, technically. Merely that if you do swear by it, you had better make sure that you fulfill that vow, because God's name is not to be taken lightly or used to back up your lies. So, that, first of all, God is not breaking the law or sinning by swearing by himself there. That's not actually technically forbidden. But secondly, we break and doubt vows because we ourselves are people we know have been or are untrustworthy. So, how many times, how many of us have experienced a place where our parents, and maybe our parents are great about this, but sometimes parents mess up, and maybe a parent promises that you'll do something, and then something comes up, and they break their word, and so then they it becomes a thing where when your mom or dad promises to do something, you say, you promise? Like, do you really mean it? And it's because we have this doubt from previous experience that oaths are not necessarily unbreakable. And so, because of this as our understanding, that's what the context we bring into making oaths. But God himself has never been untrustworthy. And when he makes a commitment, there is zero chance that he won't hold up his end. God has always held to his word. God is always 100% trustworthy. And so if he is swearing by himself, which one, in the first place, is not a sin, but two, if he swears by himself, then he is simply, he's gonna come through with it. It's not even a big deal for him to swear by himself, because he is so honest and he is not going to lie or break his oath. And the very nature of himself is what makes his oath so unbreakable. So what Jesus is preaching against here is he's instead of just saying you can't take any oath at all, a military office, whatever, Jesus is preaching against the taking of oaths to boost your holy appearance, or not being someone whose oath can be trusted, whose word can be taken as truthful. And so God himself is sorry, I already said that. But basically what he's saying is live an honest life within your communities or behind closed doors. Be someone who's so honest that an oath isn't necessary. If people know you, they should know your reputation, that you are an honest person. They should know you as an honest person. But the very purpose of an oath is to invoke consequences if you should prove to be untrustworthy. And so if you are so trustworthy that simply saying yes and no is as binding as an agreement as an oath in God's name, then there's no need for oaths. You're not going to break your oath. Now, that being said, if you are in a situation where someone doesn't know you or your honesty, such as a courtroom or swearing into office, in those situations where you don't have that pre-established reputation that's just good enough for the law or whatever, it's not a sin to swear an oath. It does not change your honesty or how binding your word is, because, again, essentially, whether you make an oath or don't make an oath, your word should be equally binding. And so making an oath, swearing on a Bible, doing whatever it is that you have to do legally is not going to change the fact that you are going to uphold that oath. And so in those instances, it's not a sin to do it. It is more, Jesus more referring to within your communities, within the people who know you. When you make an oath, be trustworthy. So my question to you is, what do your words mean to you? Is your word actually binding, or are you someone who can't be trusted? The words that come out of our mouths as believers are not to be taken lightly, because they reflect on Christ and our witness for him. And so as Christians, as Christian literally means little Christs, as Christians, what we say or do reflects positively or negatively on on Jesus. And so if we ourselves prove to be untrustworthy people, then why would God be trustworthy at all to someone who's a non-believer? And so the question for you to ask is your word trustworthy? And if it's not, what do you need to do to make it trustworthy? This is something that takes work. Not everybody in this room, I'm not perfect at this. Nobody else listening to this is perfect at this. We are going to break our word sometimes. But that means that for each of us, there's a call to live by a higher standard here. A call to put in the work to become someone trustworthy. It's not going to happen in a day. It's not going to be, you're not going to have that reputation just as soon as you walk out of here, as nice as that would be. No, you're going to be, you're going to have to work to earn that reputation. You're going to have to become someone who very intentionally follows through on your word, is honest and trustworthy. And so I challenge you, if you're listening to this, to consider self-evaluate. Is your word trustworthy? If it's not, what do you need to do to make it trustworthy? What effort do you need to put in each and every day, each and every time you say something, that it is as binding if you just simply say yes or no. So I leave you with that thought. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and let me know if you have any questions.